Today on Face the Nation, it turns out the Colorado attack was a year in the planning. We'll have the latest details on the investigation from top Justice Department officials and Colorado's governor. Diary entries from the Colorado students reveal they had been building bombs and acquiring weapons for months. Did they act alone? Colorado Governor Bill Owens was briefed by investigators this morning. He'll give us the latest. Deputy Attorney General Eric Holder will tell us how the Clinton administration will handle all of this. But is it about guns? The gun lobby says no. We'll ask Wayne LaPierre, Executive Vice President of the National Rifle Association, about that. And finally, for perspective, we'll talk with criminologist James Fox of Northeastern University. Gloria Borger will be here, and I'll have a final thought on one of the worst weeks ever. But first, the latest from Littleton on Face the Nation.
Face the Nation with Chief Washington correspondent Bob Schieffer. And now from CBS News in Washington, Bob Schieffer.
Good morning again, and we begin with the governor of Colorado, who has just been briefed by state officials there on the situation, Governor Bill Owens. And Governor, it goes without saying that our heart goes out to all of you there in Colorado. This is a tough one. Let's get right to it. We hear there may be accomplices. What can you tell us about that?
Well, obviously, I have been briefed, and there are some things that I can't share with you, but I think that there is reason to believe that there perhaps are accomplices. And much of the reason for the delay in terms of why it's taking so long to investigate within that school is because they're checking all of the cartridges, all of the guns against the ones that they're able to account for, and they're going to check to see if there are any shells, spent cartridges, slugs that didn't come from the guns they know about.
Would the accomplices or the suspected accomplices, would that be other students or would it be adults?
You know, I can't say at this point, but given the amount of material that was brought into that school and given the planning that went into it, there are investigators who believe that there were perhaps student accomplices. Again, this is all tenuous, it's early. We're going to know more each day as we get further into this investigation.
We understand that one suspect has been given a lie detector test and failed. Can you tell us anything about that?
No, I can't confirm that. I've heard that, but I can't confirm that.
Are arrests imminent?
I can't confirm that either. I'm sorry. It's
okay.
This is a situation where it's very complex, and I don't want to say anything that might hinder the investigation.
Gotcha. Gloria?
Governor, has any thought been given to charging the parents of these students with any kind of a crime?
You know, some Jefferson County authorities have suggested that at least one set of parents should have known, given the evidence that was found in that killer's room. And I think that if that's true, if the parents are thought by authorities to reasonably have been expected to know, then the possibility of them being charged in some way is certainly very real.
With what would you charge them?
Well, if you, I'm not an attorney, but if you had adults who should have known what was going on, who failed to exercise care in a situation like this, they could be charged as accomplices just as other individuals could if they knew about it, failed to act.
Do we know where these boys got their guns yet?
You know, I think the law enforcement authorities they perhaps know, and I've been briefed, but I can't, again, I'm sorry. They're tracking that down, and I think we'll have information on that at some point later in the investigation.
So you do know, you can't disclose the information, but you believe at this point you do know where these guns came from. Is that what you said, Governor? I just wanted to make sure.
Yes.
Governor, apparently there's been some email sent to somebody out there warning that there may be more trouble tomorrow. Do you know can you tell us, is that being taken seriously?
Well, it is being taken seriously. They're trying to find out whether this is a copycat, a horrible prank, as it were. We have a daughter who's a high school student in this metropolitan area, and I know that the schools are taking it very seriously in terms of whether or not that email, which has been sent, was legitimate or was, again, a sort of a horrible prank.
Governor, have you changed your mind now about gun control laws? I know you favored the concealed weapons law that was being debated out there, did you not?
You know, Bob, Jefferson County and the state of Colorado, where this horrible tragedy occurred, have very tough gun control laws on the books. By our count, these criminals violated all of them. The concealed carry issue in Colorado has been somewhat misunderstood. We have some counties in this state that have no rules regarding concealed carry. We have others that are very strict. What we tried to do was pass a statewide standard that would have made a uniform series of requirements before anybody could conceal and carry. It would have moderated some counties, it would have liberalized others.
So you have not changed your position on it, though?
No, I think that in fact it doesn't make sense to have some counties having no regulations and rules and others having such strict rules that that people who have a legitimate need to be able to carry a firearm simply can't be licensed to do so.
Is the NRA still welcome? I know the mayor of Denver has asked them not to hold their convention in Denver. Have you taken a position on that?
You know, the NRA itself has probably cut down by 95% its meeting here. I'm reluctant to pile on to an organization which certainly had nothing direct to do with this tragedy. There's enough blame to go around with us as parents, with this culture and this media which glorifies violence. I'm a little reluctant at this point to continue pointing fingers at that association which had been welcomed in this state by Denver and by civic leaders until recently.
All right. Well, Governor, thank you very much for joining us now.
Thank you, Bob.
And best of luck in this investigation. Well, joining us now will be Wayne LaPierre of the National Rifle Association and Deputy Attorney General Eric Holder. We go first to Mr. LaPierre. Mr. LaPierre, one of the big issues in that debate out in Colorado, this concealed weapons debate, people said that principals and teachers ought to be allowed to carry heat, as it were, and that might have prevented incidents such as this. Is that the position of the NRA?
Well, the position of the NRA is people ought to be allowed, after they go through a safety course, after they get a permit and go through a training requirement, to apply for a permit to carry a firearm. And you have many instances when they do that. 31 states have that type of law, and there have been no problems with it.
So you think it would be a good idea to have principals and teachers to be able to carry concealed weapons?
I think a citizen that applies for a permit, goes through a safety course and goes through a training course is not the type of person, and 31 states have proven that's going to be a problem. And I think this whole talk about that law in the mixture of this terrible tragedy is simply off the point.
Well, on the point, you said the other day, or your people sent out a letter, I believe it was, and I want to put it up on the screen here to let people get a look at this in writing. You wrote and said, "We must stand in somber but unshakable unity, even in this time of anguish." This was a letter you sent out to your members. What did you mean by that?
I think it is a somber time. Out of respect for the families and the victims, we have canceled all of our meeting out there except for what we're required to do under New York non-for-profit law. Keep in mind, we are a part of that community. Many of the police, the SWAT teams, the firefighters that responded to that tragedy were NRA members. The Olympic shooting facility is right down the road, so we are an integral part of that community.
Mr. LaPierre, the Justice Department is now proposing to hold adults criminally responsible for allowing children to get access to guns. Would you support that legislation?
I'm not sure that's the answer, but let me tell you 4 things I think.
Well, no. Would you support that legislation?
I don't think holding adults criminally responsible unless they're criminally negligent is the answer, and then they should be held accountable. But let me give you 4 things that would help.
Well, would you say, well, you heard what the governor said, that perhaps some of these adults would be held responsible and charged?
Well, and that may very well be appropriate in this instance.
So the question is, how do you keep children from getting access to guns?
Let me answer that with these 4 points, which I think are very important. 1, we need to make our schools safe, and we need to change the way we've been handling things the last 2 years. We had 6,000 instances the last 2 years of guns showing up in schools. Do you know how many we prosecuted? I got from the Senate committee the figures. In 97, 5, in 98, 8.
Is metal detectors the answer?
We have to do better in terms of prosecution. Every time a child, a student, a juvenile brings a gun to school, we ought to expel him from school, and we ought to prosecute the case.
Mr. LaPierre, would you run through your other points? We want to give you a chance to make your case here.
Thank you,
Bob.
Bob.
What is the second point?
The other point is, right now, it's a shameful secret. We are not prosecuting felons with guns in this country.
Okay, that's the second point.
And
What's the third point?
Project Exile will do that. It ought to be put in every community of the town. And we are supporting in Congress a $50 million appropriation for additional prosecutors and a $50 million appropriation for advertising.
What's your fourth point?
The next point is Congress ought to immediately fully fund the National Instant Check System. And then when they catch a felon with a gun, we need to change what they're doing now when they catch them. We shouldn't let them walk out the store and go about their business. We ought to prosecute the case. And when you let bad people go home, they do bad things. Prosecution. And the final point is, we need violent juveniles that commit violent crimes with guns should forever be prohibited from owning a gun. We have to change the juvenile laws.
All right, we asked you here because we wanted to get your position, so I wanted to make sure you got a chance.
That'll make a big difference, Bob, if we do those things.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to talk more about all of this now with the Deputy Attorney General, Eric Holder. Well, you just heard, Mr. Holder, the National Rifle Association thinks it might help the situation here, as I understood Mr. LaPierre, to have principals and teachers armed, carrying concealed weapons. I believe that's the thrust of what he said. What would be your response to that?
Well, I'm not sure that's the answer. I'm not sure that we need more guns on the street or more people carrying guns. The president has proposed putting 2,000 school safety officers who would presumably be armed in schools to handle that problem. And I think that's perhaps where we ought to look to putting people with guns, not necessarily principals and teachers, but people who are trained in the use of firearms and defusing these kinds of situations.
Do you think tougher gun laws could have prevented this?
I think it's part of a continuum. I think it would certainly help. I mean, we have to do prevention things. I think we have to have tougher enforcement of our laws. I think we need to have reasonable regulations when it comes to guns.
Can we talk about the parents a little bit here? There seems to be some controversy. Who's responsible? You heard what the governor said, seems to think perhaps they should be charged. What do you think about that?
Now, I don't know if that's what's possible under Colorado law. The governor would know better than me.
What about federal law? Are you thinking about?
Well, I mean, I think that's certainly something that we ought to think about if, for instance, we had a trigger lock requirement. And I think that is something that we are espousing in the Clinton administration.
But if these police officers went into the kid's room, there was a gun in the kid's room, parents didn't know about it. Should these parents be charged?
No, if the parents didn't know about it, obviously not. I don't think there's any theory under our criminal law we could hold them responsible.
Should they, if they should have known about it, should they be charged? In other words, that's what the sheriff was saying. They should have known about it, therefore we should charge them.
Well, that's a dangerous thing. I mean, should have known. Those are very dangerous concepts. If we're talking about criminal negligence, yeah, that's something upon which you might be able to build a statute. But the question is, how far do you want to go in that regard? I'm not at all certain that we need to look beyond the person who's primarily responsible for the act.
But if I understand what you're advocating, are you not advancing some sort of change in the law that would hold adults who allow a child to access to a gun to be criminally liable? Isn't that what the administration is pushing at this point?
Yeah, and again, that's where we have knowledge. Not a question of should have known, but where there's actual knowledge. That's what I was focusing on.
Mr. Holder, you can also learn how to make a bomb on the internet, on the web. How do you police that?
Well, it's very difficult given the tenor of the recent Supreme Court cases. The court has really struck down every government effort to try to regulate as we've tried with regard to pornography. It is going to be a difficult thing, but it seems to me that if we can come up with reasonable restrictions, reasonable regulations in how people interact on the internet, that is something that the Supreme Court and the courts ought to favorably look at.
Let's go back to something Mr. LaPierre said, and I think he makes a pretty good point here, especially when you hear the statistics. He says that kids who are bringing guns into school aren't being prosecuted. Is there anything federal government can do about that?
Well, we certainly want to extend the provisions of the Brady Law so that we cover juveniles who commit serious crimes and prevent them from ever holding on to, ever possessing guns. These are primarily state cases, though, and we want to try to assist states and local jurisdictions as they prosecute juveniles. There is a federal law that says a juvenile who brings a gun into a school has to be expelled. It's something that was passed a couple of years ago, and we fully support that.
And to make sure I don't overlook anything, I know federal authorities are also looking into this situation. Can you give us any information on how that investigation is going or what you've turned up so far?
I think the investigation is in its early stage and it's going pretty well. The federal government is supporting the state and local authorities who have primary responsibility here. The FBI is intimately involved, as well as the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms.
Are you worried about copycat crimes right now?
Yeah, very worried about that. Every time one of these incidents happens, it plants, I think, in the mind of some young person someplace who has a grievance, who feels alienated, that that's an appropriate way to bring about some kind of resolution. So I think we have to keep our guard up and try to put an end to these things.
Are you worried that this has become or is about to become an epidemic in this country?
I don't think it's become an epidemic. I mean, if you look at these incidents, they only happen very, very rarely, as tragic as they are. We have about 52 million students. We have about 110,000 schools in this nation, and the statistics show that for kids killed in that age group, only less than 1% are killed in school. So these are extremely rare incidents, but doesn't mean that we shouldn't devote a lot of attention to them.
Mr. Attorney General, why are guns so available? You know, when I was a kid growing up, and I grew up in a tough part of town, and the weapon of choice was a baseball bat, and sometimes the really mean kids carried knives. But we didn't have any guns. We didn't know. And suddenly, I think the law is probably about the same then as they are now. Is it just that there are a lot more guns available out there? Or what has happened to make these guns so easy to get?
Well, there are a lot more guns. There are a lot more powerful guns that are available, and we need to deal with adults who make guns available to kids. You know, we talk an awful lot in our nation about having individual rights, and I think that's something we all fully support, but we also have individual responsibilities, and I think people who are members of the NRA and other pro-gun organizations need to support the administration's efforts, the bipartisan efforts that I think we're seeing to start to emerge, to put reasonable regulations on the use and the possession of guns. I think that's at least part of the answer.
Mr. Holder, if this were a perfect world and you could do something dealing with the availability of guns for children, what would you do?
I don't think that I would let children under a certain age possess guns. And I certainly would not let children who commit serious violent crimes ever possess guns. That's something that needs to be, it's a proposal the administration has made, and I think something that Congress needs to act on very quickly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holder, for joining us. This is a tough problem. There are, as we all know, no easy answers on this one. When we come back, we'll talk some more about all of this with criminologist James Fox in a minute. And joining us now from Haverhill, Massachusetts, James Fox. Dr. Fox is at Northeastern University. He is a criminologist. Dr. Fox, thank you very much for being here. You heard the head of the National Rifle Association say that this situation might have been eased somewhat had the concealed weapons law have been passed in Colorado, which would have allowed the principals and perhaps the teachers to pack heat, as it were. What is your reaction to that?
Well, this is actually a proposal that was made last year in many states following the shooting sprees we had last year. I think it's a terrible idea. I mean, teachers should be educating students, not executing them. Marksmanship should be a matter of A's and B's, not guns and ammo. I understand the logic. They want to provide a deterrent so kids may not bring a gun to school in fear that the teacher will have one. Well, actually, I think it would backfire, literally, that it would be an opportunity for a child to go to school and shoot it out with the teacher. And when you look at the case we just had in Colorado, do you think the idea that someone else would have had a gun would deter them? No, they weren't planning to live anyway.
Dr. Fox, you've done a lot of research on parental responsibility and all of this. And a local sheriff came out yesterday and said a lot of this stuff was clearly visible and the parents should have known and they should be held accountable. What do you think about that?
Well, hindsight is 20/20. And you have to take with a grain of salt, maybe the whole shaker, I don't know, this idea that the parents should have known and should have done something. Look at the Springfield, Oregon case, Kip Kinkle from last year. His parents knew. They tried to do everything they could to get their son some help and some alternatives to his guns. Well, what did he do? He punished his parents by killing them first before he went on the rampage at his school. In cases of gross negligence, yes, parents are responsible. But most of the time, parents are well-meaning and would like to have a greater role in the upbringing of their kids, and they just lack the support to guide and control their kids. Let's assist families, not assail them.
How would you assist families? You're the parent of a teenage son. You think something is really wrong. Mm-hmm. What should they do?
Well, what we need to do in this country is to be a little bit more broad-minded when it comes to counseling. Not just counseling for children, but family counseling. We need to upgrade the number of counselors we have in the schools because they are in the best position to identify problem kids because after all, kids spend more time with teachers and guidance counselors than they do even with their parents.
Why does this keep happening?
Well, you did mention before a contagion effect, and that's true. Last year we had a whole string of them because there were kids out there in America who saw these heroes in their mind who got even with the nasty teachers and the bullies and made the cover of newspapers everywhere, and they wanted to be celebrities too. I had expected that the summertime would be a natural break and we would have no incidents this year. Unfortunately, we didn't quite get there. There are a lot of kids out there who are angry and hostile, and they see this perhaps as their opportunity to get even as well. But let's keep this in perspective, and I think someone else mentioned this before. Your child has a greater chance of dying on a bicycle on the way to school than he does at school by an armed classmate. Let's not go overboard with metal detectors and police officers patrolling the halls. Let's be sensible about it. Schools are actually the safest place in the lives of our kids. Less crime in school than anywhere else, except the closet.
Doctor, thank you so much for joining us.